All right. As we get into Exodus, I want to remind us of Jesse's question from last week. How long did it take for a new king to come in that didn't know Joseph? So Joseph dies probably within the lifespan of the Pharaoh that he knew, or that Pharaoh's son perhaps had taken over the dynasty. But that dynasty is about 1900 BC to 1700 BC, right around those dates. And by the time we get to the time of the Exodus, we're somewhere around 1400 BC. And I went back to look at some Jewish traditions, and most of them are pretty generalized around such and such a date when they're talking about these things. I ran into one that was not nearly so general. I'll get to that in just a second. There seems to have been a king named Ahmose, A-H-M-O-S-E, who established a dynasty known as the New Kingdom at about 1570 BC. I think that this is the kingdom, this is the king that did not know Joseph. So some 400 years, 430 years after Joseph brings his family to Egypt, then we have a new dynasty that comes up. And this guy's name is Ahmose, A-H-M-O-S-E. Either he or one of his heirs is probably the king that's mentioned in verse 8 of chapter 1. A new king came in that did not know Joseph. Some of the translations are a little bit more specific. A new king to whom Joseph meant nothing is what the NIV has. Joseph was a nobody. It wasn't his dynasty. It wasn't his famine. It wasn't his problem. It wasn't his wealth. So Joseph was not somebody to him. The Jewish scholars use the year 1446 BC as a general date for the Exodus. Well, then I turn to another entry, and this one's not general at all. From Sunday, February 10th, to Friday night, March 22nd, 1446 BC, is when they think the plagues were. So they think the Exodus happened on Friday, March 22nd, 1446 BC. Most of the folks that you read say, well, somewhere around, the 13th to 15th centuries. Whoever wrote this said, no, I know what day it was. It was Friday, March 22nd, 1446 BC. What we find when we start the Exodus is that the threat of Jacob's family, the nation of Israel, is big and getting bigger. And they can't find a way to do anything about it. So this king that comes to power that does not know Joseph, he has no reason at all to celebrate Israel being there. All he knows is that they're getting larger and larger, and he's afraid of them. He doesn't feel comfortable with that large a nation living within the confines of his nation. So beginning in verse 6 of chapter 1, Joseph and all of his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly and increased in numbers and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. So they settle in the land of Goshen. They have lots of flocks and herds, and the people just keep multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. This would not have happened in 30 or 40 years. This happened over a period of some 400 years. And I did a chart one time. I think I was trying to figure out how long it would take for Cain to have a wife that lived somewhere else. Remember, Cain leaves Eden and he ends up marrying a woman that lives somewhere else. How long would it take for them to generate a good supply of women for Cain to find somebody? And it really didn't take that long. When you have each generation having, say, 4 or 5 children each, and you multiply that out, it comes out to a pretty large number fairly quickly. Verse 8, a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if a war breaks out, we'll join our enemies and fight against us and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. And in all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The NIV uses that word twice for emphasis, right? Ruthlessly. In other words, they didn't care at all about the Israelites. They did not have a soft spot in their heart. These were, as far as they were concerned, a slave labor people, and they could use them any way they wanted, and Pharaoh was backing that up. It reminds me a little bit of the way things happened in the late 30s and 40s in Germany. You have a fellow that comes in and says, our enemy is from within, we need to do something about the Jewish problem, and they begin trying to find ways to get rid of them. And it ends up with the same kinds of attacks. If we can get the people to rat out the people, then we can handle the situation. Now, we're going to read a fairly lengthy passage from chapter 1, verse 15, all the way down through part of chapter 2. And I want us to talk about Pharaoh's big plan to deal with the Jewish problem. Right? He has put them under slavery. He has basically made them prisoners within the land of Goshen. And as a result, they just keep getting bigger. He's not getting the answer to the question that he wanted, so he's got to try something else. So here's his answer, beginning in verse 15 of chapter 1. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, while you are helping the Hebrew women during their childbirth on the delivering stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do, and they let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They're very vigorous, and they give birth before the midwives arrive. I love that excuse. That's just, we Hebrew women, we're just good at this. We have kids, and we just move on with our day. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Pharaoh gave another order to all of his people. Every Hebrew born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. So he broadens out the attack. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him, coated it with tar and pitch. She placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of those Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. The thing that interests me most, I think, about this passage, and all of us are familiar with it, this is one of those stories that you learn very early on in Bible class, and we all are entranced with the idea of them putting the baby Moses into the bulrushes and Pharaoh's daughter coming and getting him. But there's something huge going on here that I don't want us to miss. And particularly in our modern era where abortion has become so prominent in our country, this is a really interesting passage to me. In the ancient world, you have different groups of people who are told specifically to kill these boys when they're born. Right? So we're not even talking partial birth abortion. We're talking full birth, kill the child after it's born. And one after another, these groups of people go against Pharaoh and against his decrees because they hold human life to be an important thing. Now, we don't have them as witnesses. We can't talk to them about everything that was going on in their minds or in their hearts. But we do have a chronicle of the things that the Pharaoh tried to get done and couldn't get done because the people cared about human life. So we'll start with the midwives. We can give them a quick excuse, right? They're used to delivering babies. They're not used to killing babies. So they're not about to be interested in doing that kind of dirty work for the Pharaoh. So they're an easy explanation. And they lied to save the children. Right? The Hebrew women, they just deliver before we get there. We can't do anything about it. We don't even get to check up and see what kind of kid they had. We would never know because they would never show us the babies and they would never brag to us about the babies that they had, right? So, but we show up late, so we're out of the loop. We don't know. We can't do anything about it. But then he says, all subjects, every order to all of his people. Pharaoh says, if you see a Hebrew baby boy born, kill him. So that includes both the Hebrew people, the Hebrew midwives, and the Egyptian people that have any kind of interaction with the Jewish people. Notice, nobody is wanting to turn over the babies. Right? There should be a passage that follows maybe in between this edict and the birth of Moses to say, and the people complied and lots of baby boys were being killed. There's not one. The people were never on board with this horrible plan that Pharaoh had hatched. So they're not killing all of the boys. It's a little bit opposite of the situation in China and India and Pakistan right now, where the estimate is that about 23 million girls have been aborted as sex-specific abortions. I'm sure all of us have heard at some time about the problem in China where everybody wants a boy, and they are limited in the number of children that they can have because the nation is so overpopulated. So they choose to have a son rather than a daughter. And the numbers are not that big when you just look at the raw numbers. The typical birth rate of male and female worldwide is about 106 males for every 100 females. There are about 6 more boys born than girls. By the time you get to the age of 20, there are less boys than girls because more boys die in the process of growing up than girls do, whether it's accidents or whatever it is about boys. But more boys die in the process of growing up. So it evens itself out. The numbers in China are about 114 boys born for every 100 girls. So there's only a differentiation there of about 8, right, between 106 to 114. But when you multiply that, thousands upon thousands, 10,000s upon 10,000s, millions upon millions, they're killing a great number of girls to give themselves the opportunity to have boys. And as a result, there is a generation in China and in India right now that is very male heavy. Lots and lots of males and not enough females in the population. This was the opposite. We'll keep the girls. Right? Maybe Pharaoh thinks if we raise a bunch of Hebrew girls, we can intermarry with them. They'll be under the oversight of an Egyptian man, and we can suppress whatever they were going to do. But we don't want those males because those males are going to be members of the army. They're going to be able to fight against us. So it's okay if we keep the girls, not okay if we keep the guys. So kind of the opposite of what the Far East is seeing in their practices currently. But again, everybody refuses. Nobody is willing to turn them in. And then you have a man from the tribe of Levi who married a woman from the tribe of Levi. Somebody want to provide names? Amram and Jochebed, right? They're not named in the beginning here. The sister that goes and watches over him in the bulrushes, also not listed a name here. Who is she? That's Miriam, all right? So we know these folks. We're familiar with him. He also has an older brother named Aaron, right? We know this family. We're familiar with them. But the beginning of Exodus does not give us all of their names, just identities. They're from the tribe of Levi. That becomes extraordinarily important later on, although at this point it's just one of the tribes. The tribe of Levi will become the tribe that is the priestly tribe, partially because Moses was the great leader of the Exodus, and partly because of his older brother Aaron, who becomes the first high priest. So the priestly line comes down through Levi. So if you ask a Jew in, say, 900, he knows all about this. He's fully aware that if they were Levites, that was important. But at the time that this is happening, it's not as important to those people. So in Hebrews 11:23, we see the Hebrew writer talking about the faith of Amram and Jochebed. So if you want to run over there, Hebrews 11 is that great faith chapter where we find so many stories about the faith of the people of old. And in 11:23, 22, by the way, is by faith, Joseph said, "Don't leave my bones in Egypt." Verse 23, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. The Hebrew writer is very complimentary toward the Hebrew people. And so in his mind, they were not afraid. You might read into that they were more afraid of God than they were of Pharaoh, or you might read into that they were more in love with their baby boy than they were in love with doing what Pharaoh wanted them to do. However you want to interpret that. The Hebrew writer says they saw that he was not an ordinary child. The Exodus text says they saw that he was a fine child. Okay? Anybody have the King James? What does it say? Beautiful. He's a beautiful child. Do you know any parents that once they had their baby, they don't think that this is an extraordinary child, this is a beautiful child? We pretty much all think that way. Now, you can ask Becky later what my grandmother said about me, but by and large, people love the babies, and they think, well, I'll just tell them. My grandmother told the nurse, don't show that baby to his mother. And interpret that any way you want to. Evidently, I was not a handsome child. But there's a sense in which there is a greater respect for the law of God, a greater respect for human life. I don't think we should read into the text that Amram and Jochebed had any clue who Moses would become, that somehow they knew in advance or had premonitions that Moses was going to be a great leader of the Exodus. But they looked at him and they said, we can't kill this baby. He's too special for that. And so they put him into the bulrushes, which gets us to Pharaoh's daughter. When Pharaoh's daughter comes out to bathe, she finds this baby, and this baby would have been identifiable as a Hebrew baby, right? So he's got the features of a Hebrew baby. He is in this little boat. She says this is one of those Hebrew children. And her responsibility as an Egyptian and as a child of Pharaoh is to kill him. She should have told her attendant, take that baby and throw him in the water. Get him out of that little boat. The crocodiles can't get to him in there. Throw him out there into the water. She doesn't. Why not? Because even Pharaoh's daughter knows better than that. Right? She's a human being. She has compassion. She has empathy for this child. And so she immediately wants to do something positive, not negative, for this baby in the basket. Miriam is close by. She says, would you like for me to go get a wet nurse for the baby? And she says, absolutely, do that. And she pays the mother of a Hebrew baby to keep him alive. This is Pharaoh's daughter. As long as he is under the care of his mother, he is at least becoming safer and safer in the sense that he's no longer a little baby. He's not a newborn anymore. I'm not sure at what age they weaned their children. I've heard estimates anywhere from 3 years to 5 years. So when he is finally weaned, when Jochebed finally says, okay, he's old enough, I'm going to turn him over, then Pharaoh's own daughter brings him into the lavish lifestyle of the Egyptians. He is going to be taken care of as long as he wants to be Pharaoh's guy, as long as he's faithful to the Pharaoh way. He's set. He's not going to have any problems, and that gives him an opportunity to learn some things that other Hebrew children would not have learned. By the time we get to the Exodus, he is able to read and write. Right? So when God tells him stuff, he's able to write things down. So we attribute all 5 of the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, to Moses, with perhaps the exception of that little section where it talks about Moses dying. It would be a little bit difficult for him to have written that down. Perhaps Joshua took over at that point. But Moses knows how to write. He speaks Egyptian. He speaks Hebrew. He can probably write in hieroglyph and in cuneiform. This is a well-educated guy by the time he gets the opportunity to be God's man to lead the Exodus. His life is easily divided into 3 sections. He lives to be 120 years old. And this first 40 years, God gets him ready for the job that he's going to have him do. So everything that Moses needs, God is going to provide in these first 40 years before he ever stands in front of Pharaoh the first time. He is well prepared for the task at hand. And we'll talk some more next week about some of those preparations that he received. But as far as his education is concerned, Moses was given everything he needed to get ready to lead the children of Israel up out of Egypt. So we will leave it right there. But it's my pet peeve. It's my pet project. I don't do as much as I should do in protecting the unborn, but I do like to talk about it, and I do like to encourage other people to talk about it. It is a huge political question. A lot of the discussion that's going on currently about justices in the Supreme Court, it comes right back down to this. The number of justices that are conservative enough to protect the unborn children right now has gotten too many to be comfortable for those who want to continue the practice of abortion. I don't think it will ever be wiped out completely, but it needs to be constantly monitored and brought down as much as possible. We've made some inroads. We've made some progress. The difference between the number of abortions in the early parts of this millennium, say around 2000, and in 2021, there are fewer by probably 200 to 300,000 deaths per year. So we haven't cut it by 25%, but maybe close, and that needs to be cut by another 75%. But as many times as we can intervene and encourage young women to have their children, to do whatever it takes to help them make that possible, the better off we will be. But we're still, and I think this is the number from 2018, murdering about 618 to 620,000 unborn children per year in the Christian nation. So as long as that is the case, we need to continue to intervene. One more thing. When she takes him out and adopts him, she gives him a name, and that's the name by which we know him. He is Moses because Pharaoh's daughter named him Moses. Now, whether he had another name as a Hebrew, we don't know. There is a name that's kicked around, Moshe, M-O-S-H-E, which basically just means to be born. So the little baby, the born one, may have been what they called him to begin. But it's the same root as the name Tutmos. So you know King Tut? His name means the god Tut has been born. So they referred to him as the god Tut, to be born. Moses was drawn out or born out to come out of the water. So his name is a mixture, I think, of his Hebrew and his Egyptian heritage. And again, that's going to serve him really, really well in the work that God has lined up for him to do. All right, if there's any way that we can encourage you or help you by way of a public response, we're going to stand and sing a song. We'll help you any way we can.